The town of Brooksville was known for its quiet streets and friendly neighbors. But recently, it had gained a dark reputation. A string of unsolved murders had rocked the community, leaving its residents terrified and on edge. Over the past few months, 5 people had been killed, each in different parts of town with no clear pattern. There were no obvious connections between the victims, different ages, jobs, and lifestyles, yet all shared the same fate, found dead in their homes or nearby, with no signs of forced entry. Detective Harris, the lead investigator, had been working tirelessly on the case, but progress was slow. The lack of clues and the randomness of the murders left him frustrated. "There has to be something we're missing," he muttered to himself, poring over the latest case file. His partner, Detective Avery, sat across from him at the station, equally stumped. Then a detail caught Harris's eye. In reviewing the victims' routines, he noticed that all of them had visited the same place just days before their deaths. The local Mart, owned by a man named Sam. It seemed like a coincidence at first, but with nothing else to go on, Harris decided to follow the lead. Sam's Mart was a small convenience store at the heart of Brooksville. It was a place where everyone stopped by for groceries, snacks, or the latest town gossip. Sam, the store's owner, was a familiar face. Middle-aged, polite, and well-liked by most who knew him. The idea that he could be involved in something so sinister seemed far-fetched, but Harris couldn't ignore the connection. The next day, Harris and Avery paid a visit to Sam's store. Inside, the shelves were lined with basic household goods and food items, nothing out of the ordinary. Sam was behind the counter, ringing up a customer with his usual friendly smile. He seemed unfazed when the detectives walked in, greeting them warmly as if nothing was amiss. "Good morning, officers. What can I do for you?" Sam asked, his tone casual. "We're looking into the recent murders," Harris said, watching Sam closely. "Just a routine visit. We noticed that all the victims had shopped here before they were killed." Sam's smile faltered just for a moment. "That's terrible. But you know how it is in a small town. Everyone comes here at some point." Harris nodded, but the brief hesitation in Sam's demeanor hadn't gone unnoticed. He and Avery walked around the store, pretending to browse the shelves, but Harris's mind was racing. Something about Sam seemed off, though he couldn't put his finger on it just yet. Before leaving, Harris glanced over at the security cameras perched in the corners of the store. "Mind if we take a look at your footage from the past few weeks?" he asked. Sam didn't hesitate. "Of course, officer. Anything to help." As Harris and Avery left the store with the tapes, an unsettling feeling lingered in the air. The peaceful town of Brooksville was hiding something darker, and Harris knew that this investigation was just beginning. Back at the station, Harris and Avery began reviewing the security footage from Sam's Mart. The footage seemed ordinary, customers coming and going, buying groceries, chatting with Sam. It all looked perfectly innocent, but Harris felt a nagging sense that something was missing. He watched the footage intently, rewinding and pausing at various moments, but nothing jumped out. "Maybe we're chasing a dead end," Avery said, leaning back in his chair. "Sam seems like an average guy. No one would suspect him." Harris rubbed his chin. "Maybe, but something doesn't feel right. All the victims shopped there days before they were killed. That can't just be a coincidence." As they watched more footage, Harris noticed something strange. Sam had a habit of engaging certain customers in long conversations, those same customers who ended up dead shortly afterward. He seemed to give them extra attention, sometimes leading them to the back of the store for no clear reason. It wasn't overtly suspicious, but it raised questions. Harris paused the video at one such interaction. "Look at this. Sam spends a lot of time with this guy, Charles Burnley. He was one of the victims." Avery leaned in. "Yeah, it's weird. Why take him to the back of the store? There's nothing back there except storage." Harris replayed the footage. Sam led Charles down one of the aisles and through a door into what appeared to be a stockroom. The camera inside that room, however, was positioned poorly and only showed the entrance. They couldn't see what happened inside. "That's odd," Harris muttered. "We need to find out what's back there." The next day, Harris and Avery returned to the store. This time, their approach was more direct. "We'd like to take a look at your stockroom," Harris said. Sam, who had greeted them warmly before, hesitated for a split second before nodding. "Sure, it's just storage, but go ahead," Sam said, trying to maintain his usual smile. Harris and Avery followed Sam to the back of the store, where he unlocked the door to the stockroom. Inside, it looked like any other storeroom. Boxes of goods stacked neatly, shelves of canned items, nothing out of place. But Harris wasn't convinced. He began inspecting the room closely, tapping the walls, checking behind boxes. After a few minutes of searching, Avery found something unusual near a stack of crates. "Harris, take a look at this." It was a small, hidden compartment behind the crates, just big enough to store something. Or someone. The compartment looked like it hadn't been used recently, but it was clear that it wasn't meant to be found easily. Sam's face had turned pale. "I don't know anything about that," he said quickly, but his nervousness betrayed him. Harris exchanged a look with Avery. This wasn't just about the store anymore. There was something far more sinister going on, and Sam was hiding it right in plain sight. Sam's unease only grew as Harris and Avery continued their investigation. The hidden compartment in the stockroom raised too many questions, and Sam's jittery behavior didn't help. Although Sam insisted that he didn't know anything about the hidden compartment, Harris wasn't buying it. Something was off, and they needed more than just circumstantial evidence to make a move. "We need a search warrant," Harris said as they left the store. "There's something Sam's hiding, and we're not going to find it by just looking around." Avery nodded in agreement. "Let's get one and come back tomorrow. If he's been killing his customers, he's bound to slip up." Back at the station, Harris filed the paperwork to obtain a search warrant, and within hours it was granted. That same evening, they gathered a small team and returned to Sam's Mart. This time, they weren't just browsing, they were ready to tear the place apart if necessary. Sam greeted them nervously as they entered. "I already told you, there's nothing more to find," he stammered. But Harris wasn't having it. "Step aside, Sam," Harris said firmly, flashing the search warrant. "We're going to find out for ourselves." The officers began systematically searching every corner of the store, not just the stockroom. They checked the walls for hidden compartments, scoured the basement, and even looked under the floorboards. Meanwhile, Sam watched helplessly, his hands shaking as he stood behind the counter. After hours of searching, they found something buried under the floor in the stockroom, something that confirmed their worst fears. Avery pried up one of the loose boards and uncovered a box wrapped in plastic. When they opened it, Harris felt a chill run down his spine. Inside the box were personal belongings. They belonged to the victims of the recent murders, the ones who had last been seen shopping at Sam's Mart. The room fell silent as Harris held up one of the IDs. "This is Charles Burnley's," he said, his voice steady but cold. "This proves it, Sam." Sam's face turned ashen, his nervous stammer gone. He took a step back, his eyes darting toward the exit, as if calculating whether he could make a run for it. But Harris was quicker. "Don't even think about it," he warned, grabbing Sam by the arm. "You don't understand," Sam shouted, panic seeping into his voice. "It wasn't me. I didn't have a choice." "You don't know what they'll do if I talk." Harris narrowed his eyes. "Who's they, Sam? Who are you covering for?" But Sam clammed up, refusing to say another word. He was taken into custody as the officers bagged the evidence. The personal items linked him directly to the victims, but there was more to this story. Someone else was pulling the strings, and Sam was too terrified to reveal who it was. As Sam was led out in handcuffs, Harris and Avery exchanged a knowing look. The case was far from over. This was only the beginning of something much darker. The police station buzzed with tension as Sam sat in the interrogation room, his hands cuffed to the table. Harris and Avery watched him through the glass, observing his every movement. Sam was visibly shaken, beads of sweat dripping down his face. He knew what was coming. But what the detectives didn't know was why Sam hadn't spoken about the real mastermind behind the killings. "Let's see what he has to say now," Harris muttered, walking into the room with Avery behind him. They sat down across from Sam, and for a moment no one spoke. The silence was thick, hanging in the air like an accusation. "Sam, you've got one chance here," Harris began, leaning forward. "We've got enough evidence to put you away for life. But if you cooperate, things could go easier for you. So tell us, who are you protecting?" Sam looked up, his eyes filled with fear, but also something else. resignation. He knew the game was up. I never wanted this to happen, Sam whispered, his voice barely audible. But once I got involved, there was no way out. Harris raised an eyebrow. Involved with what? Who's behind this? Sam swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the camera in the corner as if expecting someone to be watching. He leaned forward, his voice low, as if afraid the walls themselves might hear. It's Gregor. Gregor Larson, he said finally. He's the one who made me do it. I had no choice. Avery glanced at Harris, the name clearly ringing a bell. Gregor Larson was a known criminal, a shadowy figure who had managed to evade law enforcement for years. But they had never suspected him of being involved in something like this. Why would Gregor Larson make you kill people? Avery asked, her tone sharp. Sam took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he spoke. He owns everything around here. This town, this store, even the people. I got in deep with him years ago when the store was struggling. He lent me money to keep it going. But then, when I couldn't pay it back, he came to collect in a different way. Harris frowned, leaning closer. What do you mean? He made me lure people in, Sam continued, his voice shaking. Customers who wouldn't be missed, people who were in debt or had no family. I'd offer them fake discounts, lure them to the back of the store, and then Gregor's men would take care of the rest. Avery's face hardened. So you're saying Gregor orchestrated these murders and you just followed orders? Sam nodded, his eyes downcast. I didn't kill them myself, but I was involved. I set them up, and Gregor made sure they disappeared. I didn't want to, but I didn't have a choice. Harris sat back, absorbing the confession. It was a twisted scheme, one that implicated not just Sam, but a dangerous criminal who had slipped through their fingers time and again. Now they had their lead. Why didn't you come forward earlier? Harris asked, his voice quieter now, almost sympathetic. Sam shook his head. Gregor has people everywhere. I couldn't talk. I couldn't risk it. If I said anything, my wife, my family, they'd be next. Harris exchanged a glance with Avery, understanding the gravity of Sam's confession. They finally had a name to go after, but it wasn't going to be easy. Gregor Larson was powerful, and getting to him would be like trying to capture a ghost. We'll protect you, Harris said firmly, but you need to help us bring Gregor down. Sam nodded weakly, his face pale. I'll tell you everything I know. The case had taken a deadly turn, but now at least they had a clear target in sight. Gregor Larson wouldn't be able to hide much longer. Sam's confession had shaken the entire investigation, shifting the focus from a small-town crime to something much larger. Harris and Avery knew they were dealing with more than just a few murders. Gregor Larson was dangerous, and his reach extended far beyond the town. Back at the station, Harris reviewed Sam's statement while Avery made calls to gather more information on Gregor. As she hung up, she turned to Harris, her face tense. We've got a problem. Gregor's been on the run for years, but no one's been able to pin him down. The people who work for him, they disappear, just like his victims. Harris sighed, rubbing his temples. So we're dealing with a ghost, aren't we? Not entirely, Avery replied, leaning over the desk. We have Sam's confession, and if we push hard enough, we can get Gregor's other associates to talk. But we have to be fast. Gregor will know Sam's in custody by now, and if he gets wind of the investigation closing in, he'll vanish again. Harris nodded, feeling the weight of the situation. They had to move quickly, or risk losing Gregor for good. Let's start by putting Sam in protective custody, Harris said. If Gregor gets even a hint that Sam's talking, we're going to have a body on our hands. Avery agreed and left to arrange Sam's protection. Meanwhile, Harris went to interview Sam's wife, hoping she could provide more insight into Gregor's operations. He had a hunch that she knew more than she had let on, and it was time to press her for details. At Sam's house, Harris knocked on the door. When it opened, Sam's wife, Martha, stood there, her face pale and drawn. She looked exhausted, as though the weight of the world had been resting on her shoulders for far too long. Martha, I need to talk to you about Sam's confession, Harris began, stepping inside. I know this is difficult, but I believe you can help us. Martha's eyes darted nervously around the room, her hands trembling as she motioned for Harris to sit. She sat across from him, clutching her arms tightly as though trying to hold herself together. I didn't know. Martha whispered, her voice shaky. "I didn't know it was this bad. I thought Sam was just in trouble with money." "Martha, we need to know if you have any information about Gregor Larson or his men," Harris said, his tone firm but gentle. "Sam told us about the debts, about how Gregor forced him into helping with the murders. Do you know anything about Gregor's movements or who he's working with?" Martha hesitated, biting her lip. I overheard things, but I was too scared to say anything. Gregor's people, they're everywhere. If they found out I knew, they'd come after me and my kids." Harris leaned forward, his voice softening. "I understand that, Martha. But the only way to stop Gregor is to bring him to justice. If you help us, we can protect you too." Martha looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. Finally, she nodded. "There's a man. He comes to the store sometimes. His name's Vincent. He's one of Gregor's top men. If anyone knows where Gregor is hiding, it's him." Harris felt a surge of hope. This was the break they needed. "Do you know how we can find him?" Martha hesitated, then whispered, "He'll be at the store tonight. Gregor sends him to check on Sam's business. If you go there, you might catch him." Harris thanked her and hurried back to the station. They now had a lead, but the clock was ticking. They needed to act fast, or Gregor would slip through their fingers again. Closing in that night, Harris and Avery prepared for the operation at Sam's store. The plan was simple: catch Vincent, Gregor's right-hand man, when he arrived for his usual check-in. They knew this could be their chance to break open the case and get closer to Gregor himself. Harris adjusted his vest and glanced at Avery. "You think this will work?" Avery shrugged, her eyes scanning the street. "It has to. We've got no other leads, and if Vincent slips away, Gregor will know we're onto him." They had placed officers in plain clothes around the store, keeping everything quiet. The goal was to catch Vincent by surprise, arrest him, and hopefully force him to talk about Gregor's whereabouts. As the minutes passed, the tension grew. Harris felt his heart racing, knowing how critical this moment was. If they failed, Gregor would surely disappear for good. Finally, a black car pulled up in front of the store. Harris and Avery watched from their vantage point as a tall, muscular man stepped out of the vehicle. He had a stern face and moved with the confidence of someone who was used to getting his way. This had to be Vincent. Avery whispered into her radio, alerting the officers nearby. Harris clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the moment. Vincent walked toward the entrance of the store, looking around casually. Just as he stepped inside, Harris gave the signal. Officers swarmed the area, blocking the exits. Harris and Avery entered the store quickly, their guns drawn, ready for anything. "Vincent!" Harris shouted, his voice echoing through the small store. "You're under arrest. Hands where I can see them." For a moment, Vincent froze, his eyes darting around the store as if weighing his options. But he was outnumbered, and there was no escape. Slowly, Vincent raised his hands, glaring at Harris. "You're making a big mistake, cop." Harris ignored the threat and moved in to handcuff him. "You have the right to remain silent," he said, reading him his rights as Avery covered them. Once Vincent was secured, Harris and Avery took him back to the station. The ride was tense, with Vincent sitting silently in the back, his eyes burning with anger. At the station, they placed Vincent in an interrogation room. Harris and Avery sat across from him, ready to dig for information. But Vincent wasn't going to make it easy for them. "You think arresting me will get you to Gregor?" Vincent scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "You're wasting your time." Harris exchanged a glance with Avery. They knew breaking Vincent would be tough, but they had to try. "We know you're Gregor's top man," Harris said calmly, "and we know he's been using Sam's store as a front. If you cooperate, maybe things will go easier for you." Vincent laughed, shaking his head. "Gregor's smarter than you think. You'll never find him." Avery leaned in, her voice firm. "We will find him, and you're going to help us, whether you like it or not." But Vincent remained silent, his expression cold and unyielding. Harris realized they wouldn't get any useful information out of him tonight. As they left the room, Harris sighed, feeling frustrated. He's not going to crack. Avery nodded. "Not yet, but we have him in custody. Gregor will know something's up, and that might make him slip." We just have to stay one step ahead. Despite the setback, Harris knew they were getting closer. They had Vincent, and now it was only a matter of time before Gregor made his next move. The net was tightening around the elusive criminal mastermind. The following days were tense. With Vincent in custody, Harris and Avery tried to track down any lead that could bring them closer to Gregor. They had already interrogated Vincent several times, but each time he remained silent, stubbornly refusing to cooperate. "He's not going to break," Avery said one evening, frustration clear in her voice. "Gregor's too powerful. Vincent's loyalty runs deep." Harris stared at the board in front of him. Photos of the victims, Sam's Mart, and Gregor's known associates covered the wall. He rubbed his temples. "We need to put pressure on him, force a crack. Gregor can't stay in the shadows forever." They continued their investigation, revisiting the Mart and examining all the evidence they had collected. Among the documents and receipts, Harris found something new, an unusual transaction log showing a payment made by Sam to an unknown account, a large sum that seemed out of place for a small Mart owner. "Look at this," Harris said, holding up the paper. "This could be our link to Gregor." Avery leaned over, scanning the transaction details. "This is big. It's the first real sign that Gregor is involved. If we trace this account, we could get his location." Determined, they immediately set to work tracing the payment. It took hours of digging, but they finally got a breakthrough, a number tied to a private address. The address was in a remote part of town, far from any regular business districts. It seemed like a safe house, a place Gregor might be hiding. "This is it," Harris said. "We've got a lead on Gregor." They gathered their team and planned the raid. It was a high-risk operation, but it was their best shot at capturing Gregor and putting an end to the series of murders. The tension in the air was thick as they prepared to move out. Avery double-checked their gear while Harris briefed the team on the details. As they approached the safe house, Harris's heart raced. He knew they were close. After all the dead ends, all the close calls, this could be the moment they finally brought Gregor to justice. They surrounded the house, moving cautiously, ready for anything. Harris signaled for the team to breach the door. "On three," he whispered, his voice tense with anticipation. "1, 2. Before he could say three, the door burst open and they stormed inside. But the house was empty. It was a trap. Gregor had known they were coming. Harris felt a cold wave of realization wash over him. They had been outsmarted again. "Get back to the station," Harris ordered, his voice low with frustration. "We need to rethink our strategy. We're dealing with someone who's always one step ahead." As they left the house, the weight of their failure hung heavy on Harris's shoulders. Gregor was still out there, and their time was running out. They needed to find him, and fast. Every moment counted. The tension had reached its peak. Harris and Avery, both weary but resolute, stood outside the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, the cold wind biting at their skin. They had followed Gregor's trail for weeks, hoping for a breakthrough. The tip they had received earlier today was their final chance. "Ready?" Avery asked, checking her gun one last time. Harris nodded, eyes steely with determination. "We have one shot at this." With a signal, they moved into position. The team was already in place, their gear silent in the night. As Harris reached for the door, he felt the weight of the case on his shoulders. This wasn't just about Sam. It was about the innocent lives lost, the families torn apart. This was their final chance to bring closure. "On my count," Harris whispered, glancing at Avery. 3, 2, 1. The door crashed open with a loud bang. The warehouse was dark, a few flickering lights casting eerie shadows across the space. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed, but Gregor wasn't the only one inside. "Stay sharp," Harris ordered, his hand gripping the gun tighter. He signaled the team to move forward. They crept deeper into the warehouse. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, Gregor trying to make a run for it. His eyes flashed with panic, but it was too late. Avery was on him in seconds, forcing him to the ground. "You've nowhere to run," she said, her voice cold. "You're finished." Gregor spat on the floor, his hands cuffed behind him. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. You think you've won, but there's more to this than you know. You'll regret this." The team quickly secured the area, making sure there were no other surprises. Harris stood over Gregor, breathing heavily, trying to control the surge of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. He had waited for this moment for so long, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt empty. "Why, Gregor?" Harris demanded. "Why did you kill them? Why use store to lure innocent people to their deaths?" Gregor grinned, a twisted smile that sent shivers down Harris's spine. "You wouldn't understand. It was never about the money or the power. It was about control. I controlled them, made them feel safe, only to rip that safety away in the end. You're sick." But then, just as Harris turned to leave, he heard something that made him freeze. Sam's wife stepped out from behind a stack of crates, her face pale and drawn, her eyes hollow with fear. She was clutching her stomach, as though holding herself together. "Martha!" Avery shouted. "What are you doing here?" Martha's eyes met Harris's, and for the first time in weeks, the detective saw the truth in them, the fear, the regret. But there was also something else. Guilt. "I had to be sure," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I couldn't keep pretending anymore." Harris approached her carefully. "Pretending? You knew everything, didn't you? You knew what Sam was doing." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't have a choice. He threatened me, threatened my children. He told me if I ever spoke up, they would be next. You don't understand. I loved Sam once, but I became a prisoner in my own house." She collapsed to her knees, sobbing. "I was scared. I still am. Sam, he was a monster, but I was too weak to stop him. And when Gregor came into the picture, I thought maybe he could help. Maybe he could end the nightmare, but it only got worse." Harris knelt beside her, trying to maintain his composure. "It's over now. You're safe. Sam won't hurt you anymore." Gregor laughed, the sound bitter and dark. "Safe? There's no safety for any of you. You've just uncovered a small part of the truth. You think this is over. You have no idea what's coming." "Shut up," Avery barked. "You're done. It's over." Harris motioned to one of the officers. "Take him away." As Gregor was dragged out of the warehouse, Martha stood, her body trembling with fear and exhaustion. "What will happen to me now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Harris sighed, looking at her with a mixture of sympathy and sternness. "You'll be placed under witness protection. It's the only way you'll be safe now. If you want to start over, you'll have to leave everything behind." "I know," she whispered, wiping away her tears. "But at least now I can live without the fear. At least now I can try to find peace." As they made their way back to the squad cars, Harris looked at the wreckage of the case. They all were in custody, and Martha would be safe, but the damage had already been done. Too many lives had been lost, too many families torn apart. It was a hollow victory. Martha's confessions had led to the truth, but it had also revealed a darkness that would haunt the town for years to come. Harris could only hope that justice would heal some of the wounds that had been inflicted.